Hi, this is Kelly Smith, and my equity project is around ADHD and instruction in the classroom. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about educational equity. Our education system, according to the NEA, should be accessible and fair to any child who wants it. And based on the 14th Amendment and the 1954 school desegregation case, Brown versus Board of Education, it applied to any student unable to access education opportunities, including those with disabilities. Education for All Handicapped Children Act was signed into law in 1975 with the Individuals with Disability Acts, and kids with ADHD fall under this law. It is difficult for kids with ADHD to receive services without a specific physical or mental impairment, and according to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in 2012, a report stated that 33% of all students with ADHD who didn't have a comprehensive therapeutic educational plan failed out of high school. Those are big stats, and ADHD is something that has been overlooked for quite some time. So in thinking about equity for students with ADHD, you have to know a little bit about it. So a little bit of background. It's a developmental condition characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, impulsiveness, and numerous issues related to self-management. A developmental condition characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, impulsiveness, and numerous issues related to self-management. It's not a behavior, it's a disorder of child development. There's a strong genetic component. It affects 5% of children, and people with ADHD, scientifically and research shows that they have smaller, less active frontal lobes in their brain that relates to self-management skills. Some key facts around ADHD. It is genetic. There are strong genetic dispositions. If a parent has it, the likelihood of a child having it or a sibling having it is much greater. It does not affect general intelligence. So kids with ADHD do not have intelligence problems. ADHD brains have less active frontal lobes. This is where the executive functioning portion of your brain, which organizes tasks and thought completion and memory, is all stored. So that is affected. And a misconception is that ADHD is more prevalent in the United States. That is not true. It's not just an issue in the US. It's an issue nationally. So ADHD, what is it? It is an inability to identify and pick up on general social cues. It's an inability to filter out input. Therefore, it causes extreme distractibility. So if a student is sitting in a classroom and there are lots of noises around in the hallway, outside, it makes it very difficult for them to attend to task. It is an inability to control impulses. So if a student with ADHD has an impulse to shout out or blurt out, that's something that it's very difficult for them to control based on this disability. It is difficulty with organizing and staying on task. That has to do with the slower maturity rate of that frontal lobe and those executive functioning skills. And it's also an inability to regulate emotions. A lot of times students with ADHD are looked at as being more immature than those of their classmates, and that is that inability to regulate how they're feeling. What it is not. It's not just being hyperactive. It's not just that a student has a behavior problem. It's not that the parents haven't done their part and there's poor discipline or parenting at home. It's not magically treated by medication. Lots of times students that are put on medication, it's helpful, but it does not treat the entire issue. It is not something that children outgrow. That is a misconception that a lot of people think that they will outgrow it as they get older. That is not true. It's not treated with physical activity, so it can't be resolved with having kids being put in sports or buying a trampoline so they can jump on a trampoline. And it's not a result of a child being lazy. It's not something that they can control and that they're doing on purpose. It is not those things because they struggle with the following. They struggle with getting organized on their tasks. They struggle managing their emotions. Following directions is very difficult with students with ADHD. Shifting attention from one activity to another and keeping things within their working memory. Thinking before saying things is also difficult, and improving their focusing on what is important is also extremely difficult. So as a result, these classroom behaviors do come out, and it looks like a behavior problem. But as I said before, because they struggle with those specific issues, these tasks that they struggle with often come out as behavior and can be interpreted as purposeful behavior, and then a lot of times they're punished. So when a student with ADHD says that they forgot to get their agenda signed, consider why. Think about their lack of organizational skills based on that brain development. If they forget a task, you told them 3 times, but they still forgot it, they get their name on the board for that, or they get punished. That is something that is a disability of students with ADHD. They can't find their homework, that organizational management task they struggle with. Excessively talking or blurting out, that is that impulse control that they can't always help. And asking for help after a task was explained. That is something that continues to be an issue with students with ADHD behaviors. The disappointing part of this is a lot of times those behaviors that are exhibited in the classroom, the teacher knows that there are problems, but they still get punished for that. So therein lies the equity problem. So this is a quote that I found in one of the articles that I read. It says, "A student with ADHD told me, with my disability, I feel like I am trying to play ball with one hand on a bat and everyone else has 2 hands. With an accommodation, it's like being told I can have 2 hands on the bat." So consider how some of the things that students with ADHD typically get in trouble for, how can we accommodate those in schools? Are we facing this equity problem for kids with this disability, or are we identifying kids that have this disability as behavior problems in school and punishing them for it? So the dictionary does define fair as just, even-minded, and non-discriminatory. Fair is helping someone to do their best with all the techniques that a teacher can employ. So equal means treating everyone exactly the same. When children have learning disabilities, treating them exactly the same as other kids is not fair. Accommodations level the playing field for kids whose challenges prevent them from being equal. So consider if you have a classroom management system and it's fair if all kids have a consequence for blurting out. Is that fair for a student with ADHD who has trouble regulating those emotions and regulating those impulse controls, which is considered a disability for them? So this leads me to what can schools do to support those students with specific learning disabilities around their ADHD. So the first thing that schools can do and classrooms can do is making sure that learning is child-centered. We want our kids to feel like they are driving their own learning. They'll be more invested and more motivated. And students with ADHD, if they're engaged and motivated, they can attend to task. The constructive learning theory is based on learning styles and preferences and interest with schools in school, so schools can accommodate students with ADHD. So if teachers map out what the goals and resources are and become a facilitator in that learning, students have a much better chance of being successful in the learning tasks. Another thing that they can do is integrate personal development into daily lessons. So teaching those self-management skills within their daily lessons, and how can they relate what they're learning in school to the real world, and problem solving, time management. How can you fold that into a lesson so that they can start learning some of those skills that, because of their disability, they have a slower development in those task management skills? How can you teach them to have those impulse controls when they feel like they need to do something? What are things that you can do to divert their attention? Embedding those within their daily lessons is key to helping them grow. Students with ADHD, they can grow and achieve in those areas of weaknesses, but they do need to be taught different strategies to be able to do that. So another thing that we can do in schools is to differentiate and encourage mastery of learning. So finding out what specific abilities students have and building on them. Some things that have been pretty successful is starting students where they're at and focusing on their growth. So encouraging kids that they can meet mastery, but we're concerned with how they're growing and kids being part of that process and that growth mindset. Another thing that we can integrate into our classrooms is integrating movement and mindfulness meditation. Students with ADHD are statistically quite bright. Unfortunately, their symptoms, distractibility, hyperactivity, impulsivity, etc., can undermine their learning. To help with this refocus, scheduling short movement breaks such as yoga, quick power walks, exercises can help refocus the brain and release some endorphins so that students can get back to the task of focusing on what they're doing. Mindfulness is also a great way where students can start to be mindful of how their body is making them feel so that they can come up with strategies to help when they do get distracted. And then finally, and probably in my opinion the most important, is create a positive learning environment for students with ADHD, focusing on their strengths and relationship building, and just making sure that they know that regardless if they fail, they're still going to be supported in their learning. So I just wanted to share, based on this, a little bit about my story and why this is an equity story for me. This right here is my 9-year-old daughter. She is the face of ADHD, and she is a classic case of how our traditional education system has failed her in her learning and has not provided equitable learning environments for her. So my story is, when she went to kindergarten, I sent her to kindergarten as a happy, outgoing child. She was in a Montessori program when she was little, and I think looking back on that, it really did help that self-starter. She was a learner, and she was looked at for what her strengths were, and there wasn't a lot of outside influences that needed her to be organized and manage her tasks and blurt out. It really was a self-learning environment, and she really thrived in that. So I think having her as an outgoing child heading into kindergarten and then being kind of struck with the phone calls that started coming. She won't sit in her seat. She doesn't understand math. She's silly all the time. She can't attend to tasks. She touches everything. She has more and more conflicts with peers. She's immature, forgot to sign her planner, isn't turning in her homework. So as a result, she was getting in trouble because those were tasks and behaviors that typical kids should be doing. And she wasn't diagnosed with ADHD at that point. She didn't have any IEP or educational plan. And as a result, the teacher would take her recess away. She would be given her own desk so that she didn't disrupt others. So she was separated from her peers and excluded from collaboration with her peers. She was given oops slips or trips to the office to reflect on her behavior when she was disruptive. Her behavior clip was moved down, so she had public recognition of the fact that she wasn't following the rules. And as a result, being punished for these behaviors that now we know is ADHD, and were coming as a result of her disability and the physical makeup of her brain, it did cause severe anxiety with her. Anxiety around school, self-esteem, getting in trouble, having friends. And because she was so focused on trying to attend a task and not getting in trouble, she did fall behind specifically in math, which is pretty typical of girls with ADHD, that those multi-step directions in math really they struggle with when they have all these other things that they're trying to focus on. So she's now entering 4th grade. We have identified her, and she does have a diagnosis of ADHD. She does have a plan to help her succeed with that, but she does have a lot of accommodations that she needs. You can see in this picture right here, she's a very sensory kid, and that is one of the components of ADHD. Sometimes sensory issues and anxiety can come with that, and she has both. So she does need things that she can manipulate and touch. So slime is a big thing with her right now, which you can see in that picture. She definitely has a mind of her own, and she needs support, specifically in math. She needs support around being able to get up and move around. She needs sensory breaks. All of those things that we've now identified to create an equal playing field for her in the classroom, all which are equity issues that prior to being identified with having that disability, she was being punished for that. So I think really this equity project is around a call to action so that other students don't have to go through what my child went through. And as educators, we need first and foremost to build relationships with our kids, to make them feel like they are superheroes and that they really do see who they are in order to get to know, and that we really see who they are in order